Running. So, hi everyone, I'm Kim Allen and I'm speaking in the session but also chairing it. So now Mariana has promoted the other parallel session. I assume you're all here because you want to be, which is great. So we've got 5 papers today. As we did yesterday, speakers are going to talk for 15 minutes, one after each other, and then hopefully we'll have time for questions. Because of the technical difficulties, we are running a little bit behind. So unfortunately, it might eat in very slightly to the coffee break, but I'll try and keep to timing as much as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Karen now, who's talking about taking a Freirean, you'll have to correct us now you pronounce that, approach, applying transformative pedagogy to create inclusive careers provision.
Here we go. Just checking it looks the same behind. Thank you. I am very aware that Freire, for any Portuguese speakers in the room, then I need to try and get the pronunciation right. So forgive me if I don't say it in quite the correct way. But yes, so I'm Karen. I'm based at the University of Derby at ISEGS. And we've been thinking so far about how the world is unfair, systems are unfair. And so I'm going to suggest that we consider Freire as a way of thinking about how to do things differently, how to consider sort of how we might provide inclusive careers provision for disadvantaged groups. Because I think it's quite presumptuous of us to think that we know how to do things best if we don't have that lived experience of those. So just to explain a bit more, before I go into my example, a little bit more about Freire. So people have probably heard of him. He was Brazilian, he was an educator, and basically he said that actually education can never be neutral. That it either, those who work in education either reproduce conformity with existing power structures, or they seek to resist and support transformation, emancipation for those who are learners. And now, so pedagogy, there's a thinking about teaching and learning and how we understand that, therefore, it's not neutral either. It's a moral and a political practice. And that it's one that through which those who are marginalized can either be oppressed or can be freed, and that can happen through them becoming critically aware of their own situations. So Freire, I'm trying to summarize this very quickly, but 3 key aspects of his emancipatory pedagogy are dialogue, so critical dialogue, thinking about those speaking with others who have experience of being disadvantaged, and thinking about how things are, thinking about what are those power structures, what opportunities do you have or not have because of them. Thinking critically with others that leads to that critical awareness, conscientization, that's very hard to say. Co-creation is another core aspect of Freirean pedagogy, and this is thinking about, okay, if this is the current situation, how can we co-create to bring about change? How can we do things differently to bring about that freedom that we talked about? And praxis leads on from that. If you try something out and then that's the co-creation aspect, you're planning how things can be done and in a more emancipatory way, but then you reflect on that and think about how could it maybe be done better, and you do that collectively, that's the praxis element. So what does that mean for careers practice? Well, careers practice, particularly those I'm thinking who are situated in education settings. So that could be thinking about those in schools, in universities or colleges, but also in adult education settings too. Then similarly, just like Freire said about educators in general, careers practice can be a political act. So we have a choice, though, those of us who work in practice, of actually, again, conforming that reproduction of inequality, or seeking to bring about transformation for those who are disadvantaged in particular. So, but you might be thinking, how can that be done? So I'm going to give you an example of how I tried this out. But so I worked specifically with, when I was in practice, I said I'm at the University of Derby and I'm a lecturer there, but up until a year ago I worked as a careers practitioner, largely in universities, and I had a disability and sort of inclusion specialism. And so I chose to do research on autistic students. And just to sort of say a little bit about autism for those who maybe haven't spent time thinking about it as much as I might have, autism is often how people are diagnosed as autistic. It's using obviously medical framework, but how often what that means is that autism is understood more generally in society as a sort of, in terms of deficits. So what the sort of thresholds that people don't meet, so that they struggle, they are challenged, and and so on, in certain ways. But actually, the neurodiversity paradigm, which is something that's only existed since the 1990s, it frames it differently and says, well, actually, it's difference that we should be thinking about, not deficit, that people experience the world differently and have different strengths as well, and it's actually part of human variation. So I'm going to adopt that as a way of thinking about things, because I think it's actually a lot more helpful and how things should be seen. Now, one of the reasons I chose to focus on autism and autistic students was that I knew that autistic graduates were much less likely to be employed, more likely to be unemployed, or I should say underpaid, as Alexandra has just walked in the room, and also malemployed, so where the skills and strengths aren't fitting what's required of them in their roles. And this is both in the UK, where I'm situated, but it's known internationally as well. But actually, one of the things that I was starting to be aware of, but become much more aware of through doing this research, is that actually inequalities don't just exist out there in employment, but also in our own careers provision often. So there's that reliance on social communication, whether that's on one-to-one or workshops, and actually that's how a lot of provision is delivered. A lot of the language used is nebulous or opaque. We don't always explain what we mean by things like networking, assessment centres, and so on. And actually, a lot of careers practitioners haven't had the chance to have awareness, and that causes problems then in terms of not knowing how to put adjustments in place, even if they're sort of sensing that something should be done differently. So that's the background. And moving on then to what I did. So I decided as a practitioner that I wanted to use action research. So this is something that's it's cyclical, where you try something out, you reflect on how it went, and you try it again. It is not neutral, which is why it fits in so well with this Freirean sort of perspective. It's thinking things need to be improved. And so it has that emancipatory thinking, things need to be transformed. And those also that are involved, the practitioner and those around them, also need that, that there should be change and transformation. So, and again, it fits really well with the critical dialogue, the co-creation and the praxis that I was keen to adopt. It also ties in with Hooley, Sultana and Thompson's 5 signposts of thinking about social justice and career guidance as well. So it was really helpful to use that as a way of thinking about things. And because I'm not diagnosed as autistic myself, I chose to use participatory action research, where I did this with autistic students. So very briefly, and apologies if this looks like a complex diagram, but basically I did 3 cycles. First cycle, cycle 1 was, it's always helpful to start with a reconnaissance cycle, where you think, what are things like? How can I understand the current situation? So I interviewed autistic graduates and also careers practitioners who were already seeking to do tailored work with autistic students. I then, in the university I was based in Liverpool, tried my first cycle. This was cycle 2 in the yellow. And so I recruited 6 autistic student consultants, as they chose to be called, invited them to work with me to think about, okay, if we were to do tailored work for autistic students, what should we do? What should that look like? And so they advised me. They were really helpful. We did a wider survey of autistic students and used the results of that. We co-analysed them and came up with a sort of programme of tailored workshops for autistic students, and they told me what the topics should be, how to make them more inclusive, and so on. We then did those and reflected together on how they went. They'd gone quite well, but actually only about 10% of all of the autistic students had engaged with those. We thought perhaps there's things we should be doing differently, which informed cycle 3 in the blue. And this time we thought we need a multi-pronged approach. And so the next academic year did the workshops again, but also we thought about the one-to-one careers appointments, as they'd always been called. The autistic consultant said, we're not going to come to something called an appointment. That sounds too medicalised. So we changed the language to careers meetings. I offered and delivered autism awareness training to my careers colleagues, and which led to some, offering some adaptations where we could. The rooms was fixed. Sometimes that was hard, But the autistic consultants and I managed to get some funding to pay the consultants as well for their time, which is quite important when you think about power relations. And we co-developed a website, a sort of web page that's part of Careers webpage that had a range of resources for those autistic students that we thought, well, they might never want to actually interact with a careers practitioner, either on a one-to-one basis or, sort of with our online workshops. So, and the co-creation interns, as they then became called, the consultants, they created videos saying, this is what to expect from a one-to-one careers meeting. And also created flow diagrams to explain some of the processes in the careers and employability and the recruitment process, and to try and remove some of that mystery around the language and the concepts that had been said. So that's what we did. What was achieved through the participatory action research approach? Well, I've just been reflecting on that as I'm writing up the thesis of my PhD, and thinking that actually that process, particularly the critical dialogue, co-creation and praxis, it certainly developed my critical understanding, but also I saw real change in those around me. So the autistic student consultants, and also even my colleagues. And as we talked about this more broadly, it became adopted. Because I led this inclusion, we did this with other groups as well. We started, I looked at those who were LGBTQ plus students. We recruited some interns, and black students who were also known to be disadvantaged in our university, and a wider disability sort of group as well. And so it brought about this change in how we sought to seek to provide inclusive provision for a range of groups. The cyclical process was really helpful. I ended up just thinking, why have I not done this before? I had that kind of, I'd always thought I was a bit of a reflective practitioner, but actually this kind of formalized process of thinking with those that you're seeking to support. Again, I thought, actually, it's why haven't I been working with others that I've been seeking to support with this? Having the autistic participants' voices as central was key. And I think that's something we should be doing more of in practice. And actually what happened as a result of involving those, I saw that it just led to confidence levels and for the autistic students, just improving. They saw that actually they had so much to offer, that lived experience, once that was seen as being of value, I was able to involve them in some institutional groups that I was in, sort of across the institution, and having the student voice there made such a difference as well. We ended up creating a podcast with the Pro Vice Chancellor for National Disability Day and so on, and all sorts of other things that you just saw that there was this impact at a range of levels. And as I've been reflecting on what has been achieved and against the 5 signposts from Hooley et al., I've definitely seen that this is a way to build that critical consciousness, to think about sort of where oppression exists and what we think of as normal and shouldn't be, particularly in our own careers practice. Working with others has been a key aspect of this, and then getting to work at a range of levels as well. Again, in terms of recommendations, I just think that this is what we should be doing as practice, that actually, working in genuine partnerships. Sometimes there's tokenism where we say, oh yeah, we consulted students, but actually working with them as people who are equals in this is really valuable. And it does lead to that accessible, that careers provision that is accessible, and really thinking about that. We're talking about universal design for learning, which is coming into other aspects, and actually that should be in careers provision as well. I think it's not always easy for students who've not had their voices really heard before to engage in this way. So I think supporting that engagement wherever possible, thinking about how to do that inclusively is really important. And part of it is addressing power imbalances, so reassuring people you really are listening to them, and that and paying them for their time, because we're paid for our time, is really important too. What I do want to say that I haven't put in here, I've been reflecting on, especially over the last day or so, is actually, I've made this sound quite easy, maybe. It wasn't. And actually, so another aspect of recommendation I would want to include is we need to think about how to support practitioners who might want to do this. So this is for the COCAG group as a whole, thinking actually if we're asking and encouraging and raising that critical awareness among practitioners, we need to think about the support that they might need. And for me, I found I was bashing my head against a brick wall sometimes. It felt like change doesn't happen very easily in educational institutions. And so one of the key things for me was having support of like-minded colleagues, as well as this, sort of working and getting so much from the students. But we need to think about what communities we can sort of bring about that are, and guidelines as well that are going to help practitioners to try and do this work. If you'd like to find out more, I've written a few articles so far. That the most recent one was with one of the autistic student consultants, and that's been fantastic to reflect together what we've achieved. So yes, and that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to stop there.
Amazing, impeccable timing.
Thank
you, Karen. That's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, really, really exciting research, and I think particularly thinking about learners as experts by experience and centering them, but also raising these questions about what does that mean for careers practitioners to do that kind of work. Oh, yes. There you go. Incredible. Okay, so we're going to move on now to our next speaker, who is Leah Ferrari, again thinking about issues around disability, so presenting on reimagining career counselling for adults with disabilities, invisible resources and constraints in making sense of experiences of vulnerability.
Thank you. So, yes, this research was conducted together with my colleague, Teresa Maria Scarmella, that is on the hall, and most of you know her. We focus on adults with disability, and I think we have many common themes with the previous presentation. Of course, labor market is challenging for everybody, but especially for people that experience many forms of vulnerabilities, including adults with disabilities. And research shows us that most of the research focus on individual aspects, not so much on the strengths of people with disability, and also less attention was devoted to structural and contextual dimensions that impact career development of people with disability. And we really think that using approach that focus on critical and narrative aspects can be helpful in restoring voice, agency, and dignity for people with disability. So I use this word, but it's form of dialoguing, as you mentioned. So it's there are forms of connection, of course. Some data related to people with disability. Globally, there is a 50% of people with disability that work compared to people without disability. Of course, things are better in Europe, but there is, of course, a gap that still exists. So we should be aware of this situation, and there are many factors that interact with the disability that make the situation more complex. Among the external factors, we can list the fact that many of them do jobs that are not aligned with their interest. They do part-time job, even if they would like to have full-time jobs. They have so the contract should be sometimes form of exploitation, not regular contract. So they really earn less money than people without disability. So there is a form of precarity from an economic point of view. There is a lot of stigma in the world of work, and employers prefer to hear people without disability when they have the same situation, competencies, study degree, and so on. So there is this form of disadvantage, and also they are less involved in training and upskilling training. So they experience gap, and in these days, digital divide is one of these gaps that make the things very complex. From a more individual perspective, we have research that show less self-efficacy beliefs, less self-esteem, social relational problems or difficulties, and also level of anxiety and difficulties in managing mental health issue that could rise. So all these elements interact together and impact the quality of life of people with disability in general. In our research, we move from we use these three main theoretical pillars that were important for framing our research. The first came from career as a story. We learned that career can have a lot of meanings, personal also meanings, and we consider this an important element in terms of self-narration and a way for deconstructing and reconstructing the story of each individual, identify some strengths. We use the idea of time perspective as a general framework that helps us in a focus on some specific temporal moments of the life of one individual and frame some specific events. And we focus, devoted special attention to the future as a way for reconstruct and rethinking self-identity and identify new goals. And also the systemic approach in this idea of start to examine and identify multi-level systemic influences. Some are more proximal and some, of course, are more distal, but they can have impact on the way that people approach their idea of career and, in general, their life. In our study, we involved 4 adults with a complex story of disability, but disability was just one of the issue. They're integrated with story of migration, complex story of family in terms of divorce, for example, and people that have a complex story in terms of career. And they were benefit of the law for people with disability in our country, and they attended the career counseling activity offered by the Veneto region, that is the red one that you see in the northeast of Italy. And they voluntarily took part in this additional proposal of using a specific interview that we developed, thanks also to the question and interaction that we had with some career practitioners that asked us to work with them for providing new tools and suggestions on how to interact and counseling people with complex story of disability. And so we developed this semi-structured interview that focus on starting from today, so describe your career life today, move a little bit on the past to connect with some specific event, and then project into the future to redesign your career identity and start career planning. And with this interview, we were able to identify 3 main themes that allow us to frame important resources, I think, for supporting people with disability. That first one is in relation with the structural elements. And so we have people that describe some specific aspects related to self-efficacy and specifically related to digital skills and the fact that they do not have the skills that the work environment require. There are some psychological aspects that emerge in terms of not to be able to cope with these difficulties, and social familiar pressure that have a double sword. So it's supportive on one side, but there are a lot of expectation. Also, we heard something like that yesterday that really impact the way we approach the world of work. And this is also related to the economic precarity, because for all the participants, this is an issue, and they perceive to be forced to accept each kind of work or job that are offered to them, even if it's short, not aligned with the interest, and so on. So many of these aspects, the interaction with the environment. The second theme is more related to psychological resources that they perceive. So there is this idea that emerge of being able to move forward, to resist, and to be resilient despite the many difficulties. And so there is this idea of perseverance that emerge from some of them, so to continue to go ahead and despite difficulties. Other elements that emerge are related to emotional regulation. We have this joke in Italian, I don't know in the other country, that say like, when the water reaches you, you learn, you start to swim. So it's a way for accepting the difficulties and try to find new strategies. So they realize that they have some resources that they use in the past and they probably can be used again in the future. Some of them also mention social support, and I like this idea of co-constructed support that is somehow, remember. I think it's interesting as a way also for promoting transformation, is a kind of precursor, because it's not just accepting the support that arrives from the top, but is also asking support. And the way that you ask can impact the support that you receive. So it could be taken into consideration as an important precursor of transformative counseling. The third theme move more on reflexivity and rethink about their identity. So start to think about the future and identify, reconstruct the future, identify some possible goals. And we identify two ways of thinking of these four persons. Two are more pragmatic and they focus on what to do and also how much money to earn. So there is a practical aim, a consideration of the future goal. The other are two ladies are more relational. So they are thinking about work in terms of relation that we can develop, quality, a relation of quality with high level of authenticity in the workplace, and also how the sense of belonging to one work environment can impact the quality of life of these workers. So two different ways of thinking about the future. And we believe also, thanks to the analysis of all these interviews, that it's emerged that narrative counseling or dialoguing counseling can really help clients with complex story to move from an external perspective to a more internal perspective, maybe, or becoming really author of their career path and reconsider their life with dignity and also develop a more strength professional identity, and also a more balanced time perspective that connect the different moment of the life and especially of the future that sometimes is not very well developed and is depressed due to the very difficult life that they have. So it's also a way for providing them some sense of hope and positive future. Of course, there are many things that emerge also related to the structural barriers that require attention not only with our clients, but probably also with the context and working with the counselors to change a little bit the things. And so we believe that career counselor really can make the difference not only with the clients itself, but also with the context. And in this particular case, we work with one specific career counselor, very well trained and expert, and with high level of sensitivity, I can say in this way, toward people with disability. And thanks to her help, we were able to develop a networking, and we think that this could be another way of making changes in the context. So multi-level and multi-stakeholders networking with career counselor, but also counselors that are able to interact with their work environment, the service where they work, to propose different way of doing things and reconsidering also their praxis as we heard, in order to assume and provide a counseling that could be transformative not only for the clients but also for the services. And thanks to this collaboration, we will start in the next future to develop a new project for supporting the context, the services. So it's not a top-down but a bottom-up strategy, also to impact in somehow the services we are working with. So, this is our last message, that we need also time for implementing transformative goal and really impacting the quality of life of people we are working with. So thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Again, impeccable timing, 21 seconds under. So thank you very much. Really wonderful presentation. Great to hear the voices of your participants. And also to remind us of the kind of particular vulnerabilities that particular groups were, as well as their resourcefulness. So that phrase about, remind me again, when the water comes to you, you learn to swim. Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so we're going to move on now to Michelle, who's going to be presenting on Intellectual Disability Goes to Work, Challenges for Career Theory and Practice.
Okay, Caitlin, do you mind this?
Do you know, is it there? Okay.
Thanks,
So if we just, there you go.
Excellent, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here to present to you the work of the Trinity Centre for People with Intellectual Disability in Dublin, Ireland. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we have for many years created pathways from education into careers for people with intellectual disability. People with intellectual disability have been marginalised, underrepresented and non-represented within education and within the workplace. So it is wonderful that we have seen great advancements within Ireland supporting students to become involved in education programmes, and now we see widening opportunities within the workplace. So we see a lot of the practice that we have engaged in now informing theory, which is great. Our vision has always been to ensure that people with intellectual disabilities, or what some of you might call learning disabilities, have meaningful lives through quality education and work readiness. So they go hand in hand, the education and the pathways into work. Really, what education looks like and what work readiness over time will look like will continually be up for debate, will be ever changing and evolving. It is not something static, and we recognise that with continuous revisions to our programme and types of work placement and internships that we offer. Our mission then is that there will be, and there are now in Ireland, nationwide opportunities for quality assured programmes within colleges. The Irish government had provided tremendous support and have looked at the model that we have of education to workplace opportunities for students, and has replicated or used that as a basis for which 10 other colleges across Ireland to develop programmes for people with intellectual disability, and that has, so it has been wonderful to see the national implementation of opportunities for people with intellectual disability. So really, when we look at what we offer within the centre, it is a 2-year programme, academic programme, quality assured programme, which is accredited at level 5 by the University Council. This is pre-degree level. It is the level at which people would exit formal education. So, and what do we do in that programme? We provide students with a broad academic curriculum around many different themes, learning and theory and self-development, to help as they enter into learning and orientation and transitioning into the wide college environment and all the demands of academic life. And other subjects which students may not have had an opportunity to engage in previously, in science and maths and business and marketing and the area of fine arts and even languages. Italian is the language at the moment that is presented to our students, but also to give the students to ensure that they have voice throughout their time in education, their workplace, their community and within society. We place a great emphasis on advocacy, rights and culture environment. A great advancement of the programme in recent years has been providing programmes with other schools within Trinity College for our students to co-learn with students in the School of English, the School of Law, the Social Work and Policy, and we'll be introducing nursing also as a co-learning opportunity. Our students will be part of the wider student group, co-learning with all the other students and gaining credits for their learning in that environment, which is very exciting and has been a great success. So what are we doing throughout the programme? Well, we focus on academic skills development, as it is an academic programme, but throughout the programme the students are developing very good and effective communication skills and social skills as they work together with us and with each other as a team and make many different types of presentations, and using, as Kirsten said, the universal design for learning approach in all of the activities that we undertake. They manage many different life skills as they enter the college environment: independent travel, learning about how to manage money effectively, how to deal with other people around them at all sorts of levels. So the development is in the classroom, but in so many other areas of their lives, and it leads, you see the students transforming and developing within their families, within their social environments, their sporting environments, the employment they obtain during the program and after the program. It is transformational. And there are other then opportunities around careers and workplace skills. So in order to prepare students for the world ahead, we're involved in projects such as XR, VR, which is involving students then simulating the work environment to prepare them in a way that we can support them for interview preparation, for coaching within experiences and things that may happen in the work environment overall. And also using artificial intelligence, introduction of social robots, and that's so it's very exciting and dynamic. Why does this matter? It matters because we realise that it is more difficult for people throughout Europe with disabilities to find work, and in Ireland that is particularly the case. Overall, we have one of the lowest rates of employment for people with disability within Ireland, so we need to act, and we are acting, and the Irish government has been very supportive in this overall. So people with intellectual disabilities are marginalised, they are disadvantaged, as has been previously said, and it is so when we look at the social model, we see where this disadvantage and marginalisation then impacts people by living in poverty, by being unemployed, by having fewer expectations around progress into further and higher education, into workplace and into meaningful careers. So looking at then the precarity of the workplace for people who have intellectual disabilities, we see from our experience, from our research, that people with intellectual disabilities enter a precarious workplace which is part-time, low-paid and limited in progression overall. Why is this happening? Because people come to an end, a cul-de-sac, an end point. They may engage in education programs, but there is little opportunity then to engage in further work placement and into further internships and into careers. So in the centre we have been addressing that. also then supporting employers by engaging with them to provide them with the confidence to look at the strengths that the person offers with an intellectual disability and all that they contribute to the workplace. So changing attitudes is really important through engagement overall. And so just supporting both the student but the organisation in this transitioning of a person from education into workplace, into careers overall. So we are very ambitious for the people within our centre and for those all across Ireland with intellectual disability, that there are many opportunities. How can we reduce this precarious work environment then? It is through structure, it is by design, it is through support. So structure the transition into the pathway, by supporting the internships, by, as I say, supporting organisation, but also supporting the students, coaching and the gradual transition. So from the moment we start the programme in September, we are developing the student to move from the programme into the next area, into work placement and into internship, if that's what they choose. Also, it's really important. We, as I'll show you, the business partners we're involved with, we've developed many long-term relationships with business partners over the last 10 years. So therefore there is this co-design and co-learning and co-creation then of an understanding of the jobs, the roles, the importance, how everybody can work together. And this is ongoing overall. So we need to progress not beyond just getting a job, but having a meaningful job and a meaningful career overall. So there are lessons for the system. So it's not just with the individual person and the student who becomes the employee, or with the individual organisation. It is with the system to align all of the parts so that they will work together to reduce precarious work environments which are not beneficial for anybody. So in our road to employment and inclusive careers then, we look at the curriculum that we provide, the academic one that develops the students, gives them the possibility of thinking around the type of careers they can be involved in. We work with many different business partners, and we manage that relationship with many different, over 50 business partners that we have. They are engaged with the students and the work of the centre through workshops that are happening at the moment, where the students go and visit the locations of the business. They find out the type of work that's undertaken there. They begin to imagine themselves as, I could be part of this organisation. And also the organisations get a sense of our students and all of the abilities that they bring. They, in the second part of the second year of their degree or their certificate, they have a work placement. So they go for a morning a week into an organisation, which gives them a chance to think, do I like being here? Would I prefer to do something else when I go on to my internship, if that's what I decide to do? We have also things like science festivals happening at the end of the month, and that we also have summer school that would happen in June for students who may be thinking about coming on to the program. So there's many different ways in which we're get people to understand what we're doing and what are the possible options and opportunities overall. And then this has such a transformative effect on a person that thinks there is something there for me in college, there is something for me beyond college, and this has such an effect on their families, so and their community. And these are some of the 54 business partners that we work with. So some of them will be very well known to you, international names like Microsoft and that, and airlines, and we've engineering companies, construction companies, legal companies across the board. So this is where introducing the students at workshops and through placement and internship provides this, that it is possible for you to be part of these organisations that you are familiar with every day of the week. So really, we can't leave the transition of people with intellectual disability to chance. We need to provide the right system and the right structure through education and pathways, through placement, through internships, through relationships with organisations, through support that we provide for organisations is really important. So the co-design is important, the support is important, the giving everybody involved confidence overall. So thank you from us all, and thank you from the students in TCPID. You know, our students belong to all of the students in Trinity. They belong with everyone, and they deserve that future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Really interesting to hear about in depth about that programme. Are you? Oh no, Ty's up next. Yes. So I think that spoke really nicely to the previous two papers. So we're going to carry on now with Tyza, who's going to speak about participatory career research with youth as methodological innovation for epistemic justice and structural change.
It's a big name.
Yes.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Thaisa, and together with Filomena Parada, we've put together this more conceptual piece. So we're going to talk about participatory research. It's a bit different because we are building like this conceptual framework, but I really would like to focus today to focus on how, like, when we are working with participatory method and specifically with young people, we should be doing research with them and not on them. So when I was preparing this presentation, I was going to start with the problem, but yesterday you all covered the whole issue that it's mainly put in this slide. So why the dominant career frameworks are not capturing well, like, young people careers and their transitions. So to not bore you with that, because yesterday speakers covered that way better than I could ever do, I'm just going to focus here on two things that I think is important to make our argument related to young people. So one is, like, as yesterday we were talking about so much about crisis and economic crisis and precarity, and how young people are born with the sense of this steady crisis. So it's this crisis that do not pass. So this is very important to think on how they are being brought in this world. And the second thing, the second argument that I would like to emphasize from this slide is that from this idea that some scholars are calling through this concept of polycrisis, which is very intuitive, that crises, so simultaneous crises are happening at the same time, in which young people are caught in this paradox, because from one side, they are hyper visible when we are thinking about some crises, such as like climate crisis, in which they are like, who we are thinking about the activists who are on the front line, we are thinking about young people. But at the same time, when we are thinking about forum decision-making places, or where people are taking decisions about their futures, they are mostly invisible or absent. So this is something important to frame and to think about young people and career research and participatory methods. So to help us to frame this issue, we have many theories and that we would work with, but we are specifically drawing on those two concepts, which are adultism and epistemic injustice. So adultism is very also intuitive to understand what it means, but basically it, in a simple way, is an age-based axis of inequality that is characterized by adult-centric policy practice and asymmetric relationship that tends, not always, but tends to marginalize and render youth invisible in decision-making process. And this adultism thing, it's where many of the challenge of youth and adult, when we are trying to collaborate with young people, are rooted, because we can depart from this assumption that adult knowledge is the default standard which youth perspective are measured. And this concept works and talks very well with this concept of epistemic injustice. So maybe some of you have heard of this concept that was coined by this British philosopher. We have many British people here, Miranda Fricker. And epistemic injustice simply means that a harm done to someone in their capacity as a knower. So when someone is giving their testimony or their perspective or their argument or their idea, they can be often discredited, dismissed, because not on their epistemic merits, but because of their social markers. So this kind of conference that we are now, it's a very good example that we can do self-research. I don't know if self-research is right to say, but whenever we are hearing someone talking, like whatever I look like, my speaking with an accent is always going to influence how you're validating and hearing the argument. So related to that, young people that usually people are not thinking as the most oppressed kind of population, but they can often be subjected to epistemic injustice, not simply because of their age, but also because of normative assumptions that are embedded in the very concept of youth, that they are immaterial, cognitive incompleteness, they have neurological immaturity, they have propensity for risk, they are irrational. By saying that, I'm not arguing that we should invite 5 years old to decide upon education policy, or that we should put teenagers to decide everything about their lives. But whenever we are calling upon them and we are thinking about their life, that we should be prepared to listen to them in a genuine way. So that's the argument with this. So this slide as well was very much well covered yesterday, so I'm not gonna waste much of my time with this, but there's only 3 things that I would like to emphasize, that how career research might be failing as well with the young people, as many of you already said, about this individualistic bias that we can force or tend to force young people to fit in, to compete, and to cope, not to question the system. And the second, as well, yesterday, you all talked about a lot, about this responsabilization failure, that if their career is not going well, it's their fault. And we know that this is not enough, because as yesterday, some of the discussions, like if young people know that the problem is not them, but it's capitalism, but then what? What are they gonna do about that? So, but the thing that I would like to emphasize here is this importance from our perspective to change how young people are positioned in our research. So usually they are researched, they are measured, they are categorized, but rarely listened as people who actually know something about their own lives. So our argument here is very straightforward, in which is participatory research approach can be a powerful emancipatory tool, one that enables young people to, and us as adult researchers working with them, to build counter-narratives to adult-centric understandings of career and career guidance. It can work through many moves, and I think the preview presentations kind of articulate in dialogue with this that I'm gonna say now, but mostly, like the first one, is through collective interrogation. We've been talking about collective interrogation all along this conference. So in this case, we are positioning young people not as informants, not as objects, but as epistemic partners. So they are our partners in this relationship, in our research. So we are learning with and from them. The second one is because it enables, as many of my colleagues here already said, this co-design of intervention. So this kind of methodology, by design, it aims for change, because we can focus on what people actually want and need from their perspectives. So in that case, we position young people as architects of knowledge, in which they are not just answering our research questions, but also driving them. So I think those 2 moves are doing something that is very important, that they reposition youth not as problems to be solved by adult experts, but as knowers. So this is something that is important. And young people are seen through this perspective as people whose perspectives are not just welcome, but it's essential to valid career research about their own lives and careers. So I guess this image might say things even better than I could actually put, that when leaders act like kids, kids become the leaders. So this is exactly what kind of epistemic redistribution that we are arguing here for with participatory methods. So now what this kind of methods enables, and I think this again it talks, has a lot of point of connections with my colleagues, and I'm just gonna emphasize what you said about Freud, because these kind of methodologies really can enable this possibility to create critical consciousness that not only to raise awareness, because we know raising awareness is not enough, but to create this equal relationship in which both us and them are learning from each other, and we might be fostering solidarity through this process. The very process is the end, if it makes sense what I'm trying to say. Second, as I already said, this kind of research really allows translation of research into the world of action, and this is I already covered that. And the third one, the social justice agenda, because we really are looking for and listen to people that we want to address their challenge. So now I'm about to finish, and I would like to just think about with you about what can be the implications of using this kind of methodologies as well. What does it demand from us? Because at least from our perspective, we're not saying about the others researchers here, but we really think about it looks amazing, at least for me, it looks very good, the design, but then in practice, what does it mean? What it demands from us? So I guess it's this kind of demand that we try to produce more horizontal ways of producing knowledge, and I'm emphasizing that because at least in my training, my academic training, I was not taught on how to do that in a meaningful way, not just saying that I'm doing, but actually what does it mean? It means to produce like horizontal ways and more equal ways of producing knowledge. And doing research with people and not on people. And this is very, very, very important. It demands high reflexivity because we need to be thinking all the time and across all the research process on what are my role and what are the power dynamics that are happening there. So this is not something that it's easy to do, and sometimes it's gonna question my own self and my own bias and my own prejudice with the people that I'm researching with, right? And then it demands this sustained attention to power dynamics across every phase. So because in the process of doing, it's more mess and it's more complicated than it looks like in paper or in a presentation like that. And of course, there's the issue of timing, because doing a research like that we demand to build connection, to foster solidarity, this demands time to happen. So we also are faced with that. For practitioners, there are also some of the implications that we might have that you all as well covered, like from moving this idea of guidance to, as individual adaptation, to provide a more collective kind of intervention with young people, and shift this idea that adults are the experts that are going to guide young people to collaboration. And this is a very meaningful change that is very important, because if we think about communities who have been researched for a very long time, for instance, indigenous communities, this idea that someone else is the expert on their own lives, it's very questionable. So shifting this idea to be like more a collaborator that I can learn with and from you, it's a very good outcome, I would say. Also, adopting this kind of methodology or epistemic instance might force or encourage us to adopt epistemic justice as a practice that we practice every day when we are working with young people. And for institutions, because I'm running out of time, of course, that we should advocate for them, for institutions to fund this kind of methodologies, because we already saw as well the concrete potentials. and to be able to involve, through this kind of methodology, to involve young people meaningfully, not as totems that we can then show off in conference how amazing we are, but actually engaging them in a very meaningful way. And of course, creating, this is also very important, accountability mechanisms to ensure commitments to youth participation are sustained, not whenever we are running out of funding, it's done. So we should also be thinking about that. So to close, I just want to close because I think research leaves us many times with more questions than answers. So if we continue to research young people's careers without them, what exactly are we producing knowledge for? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Really wonderful set of ideas and also provocations as well, which hopefully, we'll come back to. So thank you so much. Karen, can I ask you if you would just keep me to time, if possible, having done that for us? Thank you. Okay, so we're going to quickly move on, and I'm going to... There you go. Amazing. Everyone is so well timed. I feel like I must keep to my 15 minutes now. So I'm going to be presenting from a research project on behalf of a wider team. And I'm just going to start this with a couple of caveats. So one is that I am not from the kind of careers space. I'm a sociologist of youth, and my research is around young people's experiences of work and education. But very much, by a result of that, I've very much engaged with this begun to engage with this space around kind of critical careers, and benefited from the input of people like Fiona on the advisory project and the advisory board for this project. But also, and this is my second caveat or apology, is that I presented a version of this not recently for Christina to the working group. So apologies to those who've already heard this. But I'm going to give a mini run through of our research findings. But I really want to, I guess, have space to kind of dwell on how this relates to these really rich and interesting debates that are being had here to this conference, but more broadly around critical consciousness in careers, and what we can do in terms of enabling young people to challenge some of those issues that they face in the labour market. So, as I said, this is presenting on behalf of a wider project. This is my wonderful team here, and this is from a project that was funded by the ESRC's Transforming Working Lives scheme, and ran for 3.5 years, just recently finished. And we presented the results of this research in a recent report, but also a number of papers, and I'm going to speak to some of those. So just to give a very quick background to the project, this project was looking at young women's earliest experiences of work. And our starting point is, of course, that we know in many ways in the UK and in other countries, young women are doing very well, have increased participation in higher education, in the labour market, but of course there are stubborn inequalities that remain. That includes the gender pay gap, but also occupational segregation and the concentration of women in low-paid and precarious work. And quite commonly, this has been explained, or these gendered inequalities have explained by ideas around the motherhood penalty, so what happens when women have children and how that impacts on their experience of the labour market, but also occupational segregation, so how women are clustered in particular low-paid sectors. But we do know, however, that the gender pay gap exists for women regardless of whether they have children or not, and also starts very young. So what we want to do then is to intervene into this space, is to think about the wider context of young women's working lives, and particularly the things that are often neglected, which is the very earliest experiences of work that they accrue, including that work that they do before they leave education. So thinking then about student employment, or what we call earning while learning, which I'm going to use throughout this presentation. We know, and I'm sure many of you know, either your children or your students, that student work is very commonplace in the UK and globally, and this is at all levels. So even though certainly in the UK context there's a lot of focus and almost kind of moral panic around university students working too many hours and this distracting them from their studies, it starts much earlier than this. We know that for school age and college students, that they have experiences of work. When we think about university students, in England around 2/3 of students are working. And this is very similar across Europe, and in Portugal this is around 60% according to the Eurostudent project. Why is this? A number of different factors which contribute to this. Of course, we know more broadly, over decades, a growing demand for cheap part-time labour, which students readily provide. our friend neoliberalism, and how that has impacted on higher education, increasingly kind of changing fee structures. In the UK and many countries, the cost of living crisis that has young people are particularly burning the brunt of that, and that has been going on for a long time. And of course, employability agendas, which encourage young people to accumulate work experience to enhance their employability. However, as we've argued throughout this project, earning while learning, despite its kind of empirical significance, is under-recognised across scholarship and also policy and practice. And of course, there is important work that does recognise this, but largely, when we think about literature and on young people, we think about them in relation to their identities as students. That's the kind of dominant identity for young people. When we do think about them in relation to work, and particularly this is cultivated in universities, is this idea of students as kind of workers in waiting. They're workers in the making. We think about them as workers in the future. And a lot of focus is about, making them employable for the future. And we can sometimes often see some of the kind of key debates in youth studies, for example, around youth transitions, as kind of reproducing this trivialization of earning while learning. So we think about youth transitions as kind of linear, as one directional, or following, going from education to work. Of course, there's lots of great work that talks about how young people move between these different spaces. How those transitions are prolonged and complicated, but largely we see this kind of binary view where education is positioned as distinct from work. And this, as we argue, negates how employment and education are increasingly concurrent and intertwined. And what we see also is that when earning while learning is talked about, or students' employment is talked about, particularly in kind of policy circles, there's this focus on how it might hinder or help future outcomes, or how it might have an impact, particularly kind of negative impact on their current study. So largely earning while learning is typically kind of framed as kind of temporary, incidental work that prefigures what happens once they leave education, this idea of their kind of future careers. And you see this in, concepts like labour market entry, which, marks students or young people's entry into the labour market as that which follows education, even though we know for many young people they're already there, they're already in the labour market. So as part of this project, we've really called for a re-theorisation of earning while learning as really part of this broader, more holistic understanding of a kind of working life course, and think about how we might take that seriously and think about the impacts that has. And I guess what I want to think about today, and relate this to these conversations here, is to think about, how does earning while learning fit within, what Tristan talked about, these kind of normative understandings of career, what's kind of captured there, and how might those kind of student jobs, which are located as kind of trivial and transitory, kind of how might they fit within those understandings, and in particular does that mean then for kind of career practice as well. So very briefly, I'm not going to go into too much here, but this project is a mixed methods project, drew on analysis of UK surveyed data sets of the labour market, such as the labour force survey, to look at kind of patterns of participation in earning while learning, pay hours, where students are working, and also using some longitudinal studies to look at the effect of that on education and employment outcomes. It also drew on qualitative data from focus groups with 83 women students from schools, colleges and universities across England about their experiences of paid work, why they worked, where they worked, what those conditions of work were for them. And then we also interviewed young women aged 23 to 29 who had left education about their early experiences of work, and these were predominantly in kind of feminised sectors. And I guess I just wanted to add here that this isn't necessarily a longitudinal study, but by capturing young women at different points in the kind of working life course, we're able to think about how their understandings and experiences of work shift over time. And I guess another thing, just to follow on from the last presentation, is which I haven't mentioned here, is that we did also have a Young Women's Advisory Board. So I wouldn't necessarily say that this was a co-designed, co-produced project, but we did, think about how we can honour young women as experts in their lives. So they advised us on the research instruments and also how we interpreted and analysed the data. And that was really important to our knowledge and understanding of the issues at play. So very quickly, in terms of key findings, I'm going to whiz through these. So our first finding is that earning while learning, as I said, is commonplace. It doesn't start at university. 2/3 of young people in education at 18 have already worked at some point during their study. But what we also found, a key finding here, is that young women are more likely to undertake paid work than men. Okay, so I think this is really important then to think about what the kind of equality issues are here. Okay, and particularly as I'll discuss about what does it mean when we think about largely kind of the poor conditions of student work, which are being borne most by women. We found from the quantitative analysis there was no gender pay gap, but we warn against seeing this as a kind of gendered utopia, and that's because they're all in shitty, low-paid jobs. So it's a very low kind of level. But what we also did find is that when we looked at the older students, there was a slight pay advantage to moving into kind of gendered occupations, and I think that's quite interesting to think about. Is there a kind of early incentive then for going into these, for occupational gendering? I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but this is a concept that we're beginning to kind of flesh out and think through, is that in thinking about the experiences of student workers, we are beginning to think about how we can think about their existing in this kind of student labour regime. So thinking about labour regimes helps us to ask, why are certain categories of workers treated differently, and what mechanisms enable this? And Ricky and others have talked about how when we think about these broader crises and the kind of economic conditions of workers, we know that there are particular groups who are very vulnerable, who experience poor conditions, and we are beginning to think then about how we might think about this in relation to students and what kind of mechanisms are in place. And this includes things like legal frameworks, so in the UK, the national minimum wage, which has different age levels, which determine what pay people have a right to, even though they might be doing exactly the same work as other people of different ages. Issues around access to social welfare and benefits. We're also thinking about education institutions and markets as part of one of those mechanisms, so things like student finance, access to loans and bursaries, but also, I think, really important thinking about the kind of housing market as well, and those kind of issues that are faced by students which bear down on their experiences of work. But this student labour regime also brings to light kind of broad discursive or social and cultural framings of students, and I'm going to talk about this next, but we argue that in particular thinking about how students are positioned as kind of proto-workers, their work is not seen as kind of real, and I guess this also relates to this idea of epistemic injustice, this idea of young workers as not being fully knowledgeable, you know, I'll come back to this. But also thinking about the employment context as well. So in particular, as I've indicated, and as we see here, students, although they make up only 4% of the overall working population, we see that they make up to 20% of the workforce in particular sectors that we know are low paid, but also suffer other kind of forms of precarity and poor conditions. So this helps us then to think about these kind of dynamics of control which position workers as particularly kind of disempowered and exploited. So when it comes to the qualitative data, we can see what these kind of lived experiences are of the student labour regime. What is work like for students? And as we've argued in a recent paper in a sociological review, we argue that students can be thought about as kind of disempowered and hyper-exploited proto-workers. This idea is earning while learning as not real work. It's jobs for now, and therefore distinct from their kind of future kind of careers. And people like Dave Ferrugia have also talked about this, and I think this is really interesting then to think about that in relation to what gets captured by careers and how earning while learning might be kind of left out of that. I'm conscious of time, so in terms of their experiences, what we find is very poor conditions, regular and normalised forms of abuse from customers, from clients, sexual harassment from colleagues and customers as well, a sense of little control over their working time, and also significant mental health issues as a result of trying to balance work and study. And for these student workers, what we find is they do have agency in terms of their working lives, but this often takes the form of quitting. So in the face of poor problems at work, they just leave because they feel that there's very little they can do, and there'll be another job that they can go to and another worker to replace them. So I think that's, one of the arguments that we developed there. Very briefly, in terms of thinking about the impact of earning while learning, what we've found is that working as a student doesn't have the kind of negative impacts on educational outcomes that are often kind of assumed in some of the kind of policy and media moral panics around student work. And in fact, it may provide an almost protective factor about becoming neat. However, we do see from the qualitative data and from the quants that it has other long-term impacts. So We know there's a kind of stickiness of student work, particularly for the case for women, where young people after education often return to the work that they undertook as students. And we can think about that how, particularly if they're working in particular gendered kind of sectors as a student, how this might create a kind of form of path dependency. They go back to the things that they know. But also, one of the concepts we're beginning to flesh out is this idea of a kind of gendered nurturing habitus, where young women are developing this idea of work and a sense of self as a worker oriented around care for others, or even care for the environment, or for other people. Very, very quickly, I'm running out of time. In terms of the young women after education, and this won't surprise anyone in this room, that these transitions are characterised by derailments from their kind of aspired or imagined career path. And those are very much shaped by these broader crises that have been talked about throughout this conference, not least the impact of the pandemic, ongoing cost of living crisis, but particularly for the women who work in public sectors, the kind of chronic underfunding of these sectors through periods of austerity was really bearing down on their experiences of work. Work became unaffordable, and what we saw is a high dependence on parents and partners in terms of living costs. And this then had a result of kind of revising their work imaginaries, their sense of who they could become in the future. I'm probably, 2 minutes left, I can see. So what we also found is that once young women leave education, they face similar problems in the workplace. This is very bleak, unfortunately, so low pay, lack of career progression, also bullying and discrimination. So certainly this work following education rarely meets these kind of characteristics of good or decent work. 1 minute, okay. But unlike students, these young women were less able to simply quit. They had much more investment in these jobs, and they did try to contest them, but these were rarely successful. And we're beginning to think about how these experiences engender a kind of sense of learnt futility in the workplace. And I guess what this has been making me think about is, again, it highlights those kind of limits to that critical consciousness, okay? So we need to think about what's happening in workplaces among employers as well. So in terms of the implications and recommendations, within the report we call for a number of recommendations for different actors, policymakers, educational institutions, but of course careers practitioners as well, I think have a really important role to play here. And one of the things that we talk about is the importance of really treating earning while learning or student work as just as significant as these other experiences of work that students have. And I think that really fits with the broader calls that have been made around reconceptualising career in a much wider sense. And so just to end really, the recommendations that we've made really echo important calls that have been made in this space around social justice and raising critical consciousness as part of careers practice. And I think that's about engaging therefore with the work that students are doing now, okay? It's not about just these workplaces in the future that they're going to enter, but thinking about the work that they do now. And I guess, more broadly thinking about how this relates to this kind of more holistic view of careers that Rosie Alexander and many other people have talked about. And I guess just reflecting on yesterday's talk around utopian pedagogy, how then might these discussions around earning while learning be part of that? So making the familiar unfamiliar, okay? So things like earning while learning, or the normalised insecurity or harassment that students face. How can we provide that space for students to think anew and to think critically about that, which for me takes us back to the kind of sociological imagination. So yeah, I will end there. Thank you for your time. Okay, so right now we have I think 5 or 10 minutes for questions, because we started 5 minutes later. So yes, if you could say who you are as well when you I know you presented yesterday, but just for others in the
Thank you. Sorry, that was going to be good.
Hi, my name is Seyit Han Demirdag. I'm from Turkey. I'm a professor in educational leadership. I have a question for Karen. When you presented your work, I just remembered I actually read your work. Yeah. Yeah. So, and I had a couple of questions even that time. Now it's a great time to ask you those questions. But I would like to clarify a couple of things with you. So from my understanding, in cycle 1, you start with 6 students, and you use the term consultants. Do they consult each other in that cycle? Is it what you mean, or there are other people consulting them?
Sorry for not making that clear. So yes, the first cycle that where I actually tried something out, I did a reconnaissance cycle before then, which was like gathering information to sort of develop my understanding. But yeah, the first cycle at the university in Liverpool, where I was a practitioner, I recruited autistic students to be my consultants, to work with me and to advise me, sort of being those experts by experience.
Okay.
So we did a wider survey of all students in the university who'd informed the university they were autistic.
Okay.
And then together with the 6, we decided what we would do as a sort of program.
So let me go on. Thank you.
Um,
So in the first cycle, I also remember that, 3 of them starts, communicate with each other through online communication.
Yes.
I think 2 of them from emails,
Yes.
and one
Yes.
on one. I remember something like that. And also, for those marginalized groups, you basically, they also, create an awareness about, their situation, about the situation going on in real world, terms and stuff like that. So I also remember in cycle 2, I think 2 of them are graduated.
yes.
I remember something like
Yes,
that.
that's
And also, and also, I remember that you provide guiding counselors for the second cycle. Maybe
Yes.
I'm not clear
Yes.
on that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So you have them actually participate in the conferences with you, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's amazing. So here's my question. I understand that you kind of base your, research on Freire's, like how he says, humans are not built in silence but words. So moving from that, I was very curious when I read your, research. Have you, since there are a lot of improvements from cycle 1 to 2, have you ever considered doing cycle 3?
Yes.
And also another question, did you find anything similar done to other types of individuals with disabilities?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just if you don't mind me going back slightly, because what I did want to say was with autistic students, but this would be the case in other ways with other groups, it was important to ask them how they wanted to contribute as consultants, which was why, and so I gave them a variety of choices given different preferences, and so that was why 3 and it ended up doing it as focus groups. For 2 they wanted to communicate by email, and 1 it was they wanted to talk to me directly. That changed. That was the first cycle at the Liverpool University, but it changed as it went through as well. So kind of always giving, I think that's quite an important part with participatory work, isn't it? Finding that people's preferences in terms of communicating. But yes, another key aspect was then seeing if they are really treated as experts, it's not just to use them to glean that information. And that's definitely, and I was thinking of all the ways to sort of remove the power dynamics that you also mentioned, or to sort of remove the power imbalance. And a key way I thought I'd do that is to show them that they're experts by involving them in as many stages as they wanted to be involved. Because again, they were full-time students and then graduates. And so being involved in dissemination through speaking internally at the university, also externally at other conferences, and then sort of being involved in publication was another important part of saying, look, you are experts with me in this. To answer your question, we did carry on doing the work. I stopped gathering the data because, as has also been mentioned in participatory work, huge amounts of data. It's messy. There's feedback from all the different aspects of the careers program and so on. So stopped doing that, but carried on doing the work and expanded it to those wider groups. And we have refined it. So we've also then sort of 1 year, it was a broader group of disabled co-creation interns, as they became called once we paid them. They were saying, we want to educate the employers. We need to be, and again, that's been mentioned about sort of that looking at actually advocacy and thinking if injustice exists out there in in the recruitment practices and workplace practices, we need to be educating them. So I worked with the co-creation interns to develop guidelines for employers on if you're going to, and we then gave that to all employers because career services do have some power there. They work with a lot of employers, so kind of using that position to do that. Another group, they were working, wanted to look at careers fairs and say, well, actually, how can we make them more inclusive? So we bought a lot of the sunflower lanyards and handed them out to any students who wanted to communicate. You know the sunflower lanyards that sort of indicate hidden disabilities, so they didn't have to go up to employer stands and say, I've got a disability, can I ask? So we gave out the lanyards for people who wanted to wear them and educated those employers saying, if someone's wearing one of these, this is what it means. They may want to know about your inclusive recruitment processes and adjustments in that. So yeah, I hope I've talked for long enough. Is that I'm happy to carry on talking later.
To find like another groups, experience similar things, like let's say, individuals with behavior problems. Let's say, did you see similar, things done like cycles similar?
We did. So other sort of disadvantaged groups that we had at the university that had been identified, one was LGBTQ+, and also another group was care experience, those who'd been in the care system. So we used a similar model, the same model with them. But again, we always started with saying, what do you think we need to do? This is what we currently do. What do you think? And so with the care experience group, they felt that they needed to, I think it was educate us. So, and they created a sort of a guidance for the careers practitioners saying, we don't always want to be identified. We may choose to talk about it. This is how we like to be described. This is what you need to bear in mind when you're thinking about your guidance to us. So that was fantastic, and then with the LGBTQ+ interns, they came and spoke at our team meetings and shared their own lived experience. And that was really helpful for understanding, okay, what do we need to be thinking as we're providing guidance to them? So yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got another few minutes. Any other questions? Ricky.
Coming.
So I'm Ricky. It's a question for Kim. So first and foremost, really, really interesting presentation. I was really interested in the employability agenda and the way that creates really interesting tensions. Because it's double whammy, isn't it? Because not only is it learning to labour in the old Willis way of it, it's labouring to learn at the same time, and also placements that come along that students have to do to complete their course and they can't work.
Yes.
Can't work and all those kind of things. But anyway, the question I wanted to ask was around, you talked about employment right literacy.
Yes.
What about union literacy? Because many of these jobs are not unionised.
Yeah.
In my experience, students' knowledge of unions is like really, really low.
Yeah.
And also like solidarity literacy.
Yeah. I mean, I guess our argument would be it would be part of that broader employment rights literacy. And we are currently, this is a sort of developing idea, and we're working at the moment. We've got some money, impact money, to do work with, again, co-producing with student workers around resources for other students. And that's, we're involving the Trade Union Congress in that. So it's really about engaging unions. And I think part of that employment rights literacy is directing them to and encouraging them to engage with unions. But again, I think there is an issue on the other side, which is that unions, we know there's like low engagement among young workers and even lower engagement among student workers as part of that cohort. So I think there needs to be efforts by unions as well to kind of engage students. And certainly there was a lack of engagement on knowledge of unions among students. Some, with our slightly older workers, there were some who were engaged with unions, but still very little. And there was a sense, for some, it was like, I don't have the money to pay yet another thing to pay for my union membership alongside my Netflix account. It's not that kind of thing. So I think there needs to be much more that's done to engender that solidarity and to bring students into those discussions by unions. So yeah.
So I just checked. There's
Okay.
no one outside.
Oh, okay.
We can still
have
a couple more questions.
Yeah, I also have a comment or question to Kim, because I was really, sort of getting ideas from Karen's presentation on the building critical consciousness, and essential to that is that coming together and sharing experiences, and that's part of the becoming aware. And then I was thinking about all these workplace oppressions and harassments and exploitations that maybe you mentioned about this, but are you thinking something about building solidarity, bringing the students together, and just talking? I don't know, maybe the students' associations, could they be sort of like the next, that this could be part of their? This connects also to what Tristram said, that maybe we should involve some other like associations.
Yeah.
So building something like that to make this a bit more like a collective issue.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in England we have the National Union of Students, but we've tried to engage them actually in the research, and it's been actually quite difficult. So, and I don't know if that's related to a wider kind of, how do I say this, depoliticisation of the Students' Union over the years in England. But I think, that those kind of collective solidarity, groupings within universities, and of course, we're not just talking about university students, we're thinking about schools and college students as well. So engaging them in those, I think, would be really valuable. But there was actually, you saying that sort of made me think about the focus groups themselves. When we ran them, were almost part of this engendering this critical consciousness, because they would like compare each other's experience and be like, oh, you're paid that. Oh, okay, I was only paid £4 an hour or something. So thinking again about research as that kind of site for engendering that kind of critical consciousness and dialogue as well. And I think students don't get that chance to talk about those experiences. So yeah.
Okay, final question, okay? Final one. The responsibility of the final note we go away from. Thank you, everyone. The content of the presentations today, but also content of presentation I had the opportunity to listen to recently in other international conferences. Basically, and this is also a note for myself, basically talk about youth, whether we refer to adolescents or emerging adults, which are quite distinct group. But basically, we think about these individuals in education. And so all our researchers, I gave a lecture in my university on career issues in emerging adults, 19 to 29. But actually, the research I summarized were based on students in education, so people in education, which have issues, call for a different participatory research, for different approaches and so on. They have issues in terms of inequalities, in terms of the usefulness of a critical perspective in working with them. But actually, we don't focus on those who probably have the most important issues, experience inequalities, and other concerns, because they are not in education and not reached. So it's, for myself, first of all, but for all of us, the need to find a way to approach them. Because actually, they are the ones that need to develop critical consciousness, but also identify with the approach that I referred to when I work with Lea, a critical but constructive and balanced systemic approach that help them see where are the barriers, the challenges, the threats, but also what kind of resources they can refer to grow and live and participate in the society. So, it's a comment that it first of all refers to me, but this is also an invitation that I made in one of the subgroup I participate in Working Group 3. We need to, open our views also to those that are probably the most in need persons of this kind of analysis. And one more comment, I know this is because I'm interested in this, probably this distinction and between youth and adults is something that we should go over also in our work and approach a lifelong learning perspective, because also adults are not just a single big group of individuals. There are different generations that approach youth differently and also experience transitions and challenges that are quite different. 30 to 40s have different issues, need different support with respect to 40 to 50, and not to talk about over 50 and over 60s. So just an invitation for all of us. But thank you for your suggestions.
I know a couple of us spoke, but not everyone on the panel. Did anyone want to say anything in response to that?
Maybe I can just add something to what Teresa just said about the ones most in need, because those are usually also the ones that are the hardest to reach. So Teresa and I, we also thought about this presentation because of participatory research we have with young people. And it's not just us here in Portugal, but also across the different countries that are collecting the data. There's a similar experience with specific groups of young people. And also here in Portugal, and thinking about our own experience in terms of reaching out to numerous community-based organizations that are very much focused on working, for example, with NEET youth. And they are the first to say to us, if you know of any NEET youth, please bring them to us. Because these are disengaged. And I think that the disengaged individuals, no matter what the specifics of their disengagement is, we often, because they are out of sight, they are invisible, we don't think of them. Even when we are concerned with them, we then struggle to know where to find them and how to engage them. And to me, as someone that has a critical consciousness, is concerned about social justice, very much like what you said, I think we also really need to start thinking about these issues, right? What do we do, or how can we reach out to those who may not take the first step to come to us, but maybe need us more than many others that already come to us. And I'm not assuming that they are worse off in terms of mental health or whatever, although we know often they are, right? So to me, this is kind of like a tricky question that I have no answers. I'm trying to figure it out as I move along, but I think it's also something we need to think about as a society because of these collective dimensions, because then everyone becomes more and more vulnerable to preying individuals, corporations, whatever, right? Because people are kind of like getting into their own little bits and pieces of isolation. And the more they are disengaged from society, the harder it is for them to come back into the community.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and for all your contributions, great papers and questions. And I think it's time